Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Parishscope. This is the podcast based out of St. John's, Sand Prairie. I'm Pastor Chris Sansom.
And I'm Casey Dreamus. I'm the contemporary DBG.
Is it DBG or
I think
DP?
I see DPG. Sorry. I'll get it right one of these days.
The title is just so challenging.
And the fact that I'm kind of dyslexic and I don't know what the letters stand for don't help.
Well, and I would help you, but I can't remember.
I know.
I need to go back to that episode, whatever episode that was, and actually listen to us talk again so I can figure out exactly what we intended. Because I remember we talked about it on air, but I can't.
I'll have to write it down so I can have it right next to me. Okay, that's it.
Actually, it's an official title.
Yeah, it is.
It's an official title. It's an official title.
We made it up.
Yeah, we made it up, but it works. It's official. It's absolutely. So it's been a couple weeks. We missed last week. I'll be honest. It's all my fault. I actually had a hockey game that somebody kind of said, "Hey, why don't you come to a hockey game?" It was for the St. Louis Blues, so it was
Go Blues.
That's right, go Blues, and so it was quite a long evening. But I'll tell you what, I had a great time. I really, really did. But because of that, I didn't have enough time to get over here for the podcast, and so we went back and forth a little bit trying to find other times to do it. But man, I tell you, around this time of year, the schedule is just way too tight.
Are you busy?
No, I sit at home all day and I do nothing.
Pastors during the Christmas season, or you guys have something to do?
No, we're bored. We're bored. All of us are bored. So anyway, we missed last week. So if you didn't get the podcast last week, that's because it didn't exist. If you did get it, seek help. No. No, it's we didn't have one last week. So we will be having one next week. It'll be our Christmas special, so we're looking forward to that as well. So obviously we got a lot that to look forward to. But right now we're going to get to current events.
Yeah.
Because we got a doozy today.
Do we?
We got a doozy today. Taylor Swift named person. No, I'm joking. Actually, I will get to that at some point because she was named Person of the Year or whatever. But that's actually not my current event.
Oh, okay.
Although it probably could be, right? That's a significant thing. But that's not it. No, the news going around right now is about Pope Francis and him signing some documentation from the papacy or whatever, the diocese, or I can't think of the name of the organization right now. I apologize. Basically, as the head of the Catholic Church, he signed some documentation allowing priests to bless same-sex marriages or partners.
Interesting.
Now, I'll be honest with you. So it's Tuesday night right now. We just had the school board meeting. Somebody actually asked me about this, and I admit I didn't know a whole lot. So I spent quite a bit of time after that, reading up on it, going, okay, what's this all about? I've seen the headlines. I'd seen the headlines here and there, but I'd never really dug in. And so I actually took a chance to kind of dig into this a little bit. And it's fascinating. So it really is. So first of all, I want to give you guys a little bit of background. And I think this will help because most of us are not experts on the Pope.
Yeah, I'm certainly not. Yeah,
and obviously, if you can't tell, I'm not either. I can't even remember where the documentation came from. I'm going to read a news article for that. So I'm obviously not a Catholic scholar either. I'm not exactly sitting over here going, "Yes, bring all of your Catholic questions to me." I don't know them, but
nor me. Please don't. Anyway, go on.
Oh man, you were my backup.
Yeah, I don't. I don't know much about the Catholic Church.
But anyway, so the Pope basically functions, of course, as the head, as the quote unquote vicar from Christ. Now, this particular Pope, Pope Francis, he is kind of notorious. He is notorious for saying something, and it seems like he said one thing, but then later when you ask him to explain it, it turns out he said something completely different. And he's kind of notorious. He's done this over and over and over again. And I think he does it on purpose, if I'm really honest with you. I think he does it intentionally, in a sense, because he kind of wants to kind of push the Catholic Church in a more liberal direction. but he's also very careful to make sure he stays like right on that line.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm honest, as I read about this is no different. So the Pope also his people, they wrote up some documentation about what the Pope was talking about whenever he made this statement, and it turns out that what the blessing is it is a spontaneous blessing. It cannot happen in anything that's official or liturgical. He cannot be, the priest that does it cannot be wearing any type of liturgical garb.
Oh, wow.
So as to confuse it with anything that's like actually marriage. He says this is to keep basically to keep in tandem with what the Catholic Church has always said, which is to say marriage is between a man and a woman. But somehow they're allowed to say this kind of personal blessing, if you will. And so, again, it's really weird. He wants to make sure it's again, he says actually listed as a spontaneous thing, out of the blue. But again, no liturgical garb, no official acts. You can't do it in a service, all that kind of stuff. So it's like there's all these stipulations about it. And again, all of this is to kind of just tote that line to where he doesn't want to, he's not quite ready to say the Catholic Church, endorses same-sex marriage, but it's like he wants to be accepting of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but it's like it is really toting the line. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is it's really, really toting the line. And now I realize, like, as I say that, I feel like a question might come up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know. I might address, and the question might be, well, isn't the Pope just showing these people love and all that kind of stuff? And isn't that what we as Christians are called to do? Here's the problem. The problem is that even though this Pope here is trying to tote the line, and of course we're not going to follow the Pope because, well, I mean, the Pope is the Pope. Yeah. I'll address that here in a second. We've been calling the Pope names since like the 1520s, so we're experts. But what I mean by that, though, is like he seems to be taking this one sin that is very popular right now, and it's very popular among our culture. And he seems to be really just stretching the line of that a little bit. Now that being said, can somebody who is, for instance, dare I say, same-sex attracted, I would never say, oh, that person can't be saved. Of course they can be saved, right? And I don't expect them to say, oh, I believe in Jesus, and now all of a sudden I'm heterosexual. That's not the way that works.
Yeah, right.
That's not the way that works. We all have sin, and sin is, sin is sin. And you got to kind of call it what it is, right? And so whenever you have something like this where you're kind of like taking a sin and you're saying, okay, well, we're going to have a blessing, and it's not going to be a blessing for this. This is definitely not marriage and yada, yada, yada. I don't know. It's like saying that you're going to bless somebody right before they rob a bank. And you're going to be like, well, don't make it liturgical and don't, you're blessing this person, but not necessarily what they do. Well, it's like, well, but they're going to go rob a bank.
Right.
So are you really blessing the fact that they're going to go rob a bank? Are you saying that that's okay? And I think that's kind of the line that gets a little bit wishy-washy with all this. I understand what the Pope is trying to do by saying, hey, you're a person, you're an individual, or, whatever, God still loves you. That's very true. But there is a unique problem here when there is no call to repentance, and instead what you get is this kind of weird, wishy-washy blessing thing.
Yeah. That is a little strange. I mean, I can understand it from a standpoint of, like, if someone was an alcoholic, it's like you wouldn't refuse to, bless them or try to help them in their marriage or whatever it is. But it does, it sends a little bit of a message of, it's a confusing message, because if you're still going to ultimately say, hey, that's wrong.
Yeah.
then it's sort of a strange thing to be like, but we're going to sort of bless your same-sex marriage, but not like officially.
Yeah.
That's that gets kind of in the weeds there.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. To me, it seems a little like.
Well, and again, I'm glad you brought up, things like alcoholism. And we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Because I look at addiction, in particular addiction, and I do kind of look at it in a different light. There's a difference between somebody who is struggling with their sin, but ultimately calls it sin, versus somebody who just accepts their sin and says, no, this is good.
Right. Yeah. And I understand what you mean by that. It's hard when the intention is to continue that sinful nature. And so if it's someone who's struggling with like an addiction and they don't really want to be that way, but they're having a hard time getting over it, versus someone who's like, this is just how I'm going to live the rest of my life. So, deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is where I think this is kind of a good differentiation. And again, we've talked about this in the past, but at the same time, it is worthy of kind of bringing back up over and over again. There's a difference between somebody who struggles with their sin and says, I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I can't help myself for one reason or another. They'll have a moment of weakness. They'll have a time of weakness. And guys, like, you're lying to yourself if you don't think that you've ever had that. We've all had that. Every single one of us have had that. And there's nothing, I guess you'd say, dishonorable in terms of saying you have weakness. Mm-hmm. But there is something completely different about saying, no, I'm just going to embrace that which is wrong and make it okay. That seems to be what, from a cultural standpoint, we tend to do. Mm-hmm. And now I will say this, though, and I think this is actually an important point too, because I think sometimes as Christians we do the other part wrong. And I know, again, we've talked about this before too, but like, when you evangelize to people, when you go out and spread the gospel and tell people about Jesus, some people are going to have some different ideas than you, mm-hmm. and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're right, but you don't need to correct every wrong immediately. Somebody. I mean, I'll be honest. One of the things I really loved about the what's known as ancient word, right, catechumenate, and I think I've actually brought that. Well, like one of our first lessons, I brought that word up. But the way the ancients used to do it was kind of like, it allowed them to come to church. It allowed people to come to church and just literally just ask questions. Like, what's on your mind? What are you thinking?
Right.
You just went to church. That was weird. So what was weird? Like, let's talk about it, and it was like that whole kind of thing. Like we understand that this is countercultural. This is completely different. Let's actually talk about all that weird stuff that you just saw, and let's kind of dissect it a little bit. And you could kind of stay in that mode for as long as you felt like you needed. Mm-hmm. And part of that was because you were coming face to face with Christianity, and God is different than the world, and he's different than everything else that you think. And so all those things that you thought you knew were so right, all of a sudden is getting thrown in your face, and it's going, no, maybe it's not right. And that is a challenge, mm-hmm. and that is something to deal with. But even today, when we get into evangelism, sometimes we so for instance, we're evangelizing, and let's say the person is same-sex attracted. Let's say they're married. Mm-hmm. And you might think, oh, well, to evangelize them is a lost cause. Well, no, it's not a lost cause. But you can't walk in and say the first things on your mouth is going to be, yep, you're living in sin. That's awful. Yeah. Like, that should not be your first statement, mm-hmm. right? Definitely. And I think sometimes we forget that we live in that tension. And again, I mean, I'm going to say this over and over again, but the reality is I do the same thing sometimes. Yeah. There's times I get on some soapbox that I'm really, really passionate about, and sometimes I forget my audience. I admit it. We all do it at some point or another. At least I hope so. I hope I'm not the only one.
Yeah. So no, I've done that before, where I think I went a little too intense, trying to prove my point, or trying to and I think I do that a lot more, especially when I was younger. I mean, I think I still fall into it on occasion, but it's I don't know. That's the thing is, especially nowadays where people post things a lot, and it's very easy to just...
Oh, the online world.
The online world is just...
terrible for this.
And I always, I wrote, I remember because I actually had a few people who, like, months later, like, asked if they could share this, because I wrote this whole status about how it's like, I don't understand how anger is what people think is going to prove if they're right.
Yeah.
It's like, if I'm the most angry about this situation, that means I'm right. So if I'm the most hateful and then it's like, but they don't think of it as hateful. They think, well, I'm right, so then I can say these things. I can call these people bigots, or I can and I'm okay because I'm in the right. But it's, well, at some point you cross the line into hatefulness, or just socially unaware, and it's this whole like, well, if I'm just the loudest person in the room, I'll win.
Yeah.
And of course, are there people who kind of do that in certain situations? Sure, but it's not. I mean, the internet's a pretty big room, so you're not really going to do much. And and so, and then it's hard because people back you up. There's going to be people who, right on, you're totally right,
absolutely, give you the most likes.
And even though, if they went out and tried to evangelize, they'd probably be doing the same thing and turning people away from it.
Yeah.
But they're going to sit there and say, no, you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing by getting so angry and, using foul language, or getting all, whatever it is.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of this comes like whenever you hear people talk about. So for in our country, you sometimes hear people talk about the First Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. And they always talk like right for free speech, and they say like the First Amendment's not necessary if all you're going to do is say nice things that agree with the same person, right? Right. The First Amendment is there to protect speech that is to you not very comfortable. It's uncomfortable speech in a sense. Mm-hmm. And that's what the First Amendment is there to protect. In the same way, God calls on us to love our neighbor. Again, not necessarily endorse their sin, not say that their sin is good, but to actually love our neighbor. And God wouldn't need to call us to do that if it was just some really easy task with really nice and friendly people. Yeah. The whole point is that sometimes these people are really, really hard to get along with, and yet we're still called to love them as well. Mm-hmm. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we endorse their sin. That doesn't mean that we say, oh, yeah, everything you're doing is great. No, not so. But there is a point where you have to say, okay, I'm going to have a conversation with this person. I'm going to get to know this person. And, who knows? But God has called me to love even this person, and it's right. like that's what's hard. That's what's challenging.
It is. Yeah.
Especially if somebody believes in something very passionately that we just very passionately disagree with. Mm-hmm. You get like two passions colliding, but
yeah, and then fights can break out.
That's when fights break out.
And I think I've gotten this. I don't know. This makes me think about. Maybe I've mentioned this before, but I'm not a. I wouldn't call myself. I can't. I wouldn't call myself. I'm not a real teacher. I've done subbing several times now. I've done 5 maternity leaves for like an extended period of time, and I've done a couple like clinics coming in working with like jazz bands and stuff. And I have learned a lot in the last few years when I started doing this, to the point where, when you first start out, which I think most teachers can agree that you just want to tell people everything, especially in music. I don't know so much with like math or science, because maybe there's a little more of a idea of like, you have to learn how to add before you can do this, and you have to learn how to multiply before, so there's kind of a steady flow of like what you have to know. Yeah. But with music, you just get to this point where you want to teach them everything. Yeah. And you come out, especially people out of college, they give way too much information, and I definitely had that problem. And then I learned more and more how, instead of talking to them for 15 minutes about how to fix this piece, have them run it, mention one little thing, have them run it again, mention one little thing, have them run it again, and you just keep moving and moving and moving, because they're not going to retain 15 minutes of information. Yeah. And I think the same can be when you're, I don't know, I mean, this is just my thought of like evangelizing is, sometimes people come on very strong and have a lot to say, and it's like, you haven't even won this person over, like, personally yet. They don't even trust you, but you're already telling them everything they're doing wrong, or, you're getting way too deep into the weeds of how they got to change their life or whatever it may be. Yeah. And it's like, maybe you got to just be a part of their life first. Yeah. Watch them, observe them, maybe give a suggestion if they want one. Watch them. Yeah.
Maybe just start with, hey, how's your day? Right. Yeah. By the way, my professor at seminary used to call it getting on the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah. He'd say, the young seminarian gets out there and he goes, "Okay, everybody, get on the bus. We're about to go on a ride. We're about to go on a tour, and I'm going to tell you everything that the seminary taught me."
That's a good one. I like that.
So
yeah, it's so true though. I mean, I really I ran a rehearsal a couple weeks ago, and it was the first time I came home, and I was like, I feel really good about that because it just there wasn't dead time. I kept it flowing. Kids were playing the whole time. It was and there's so many times where you get done, you're like, okay, well that was bad because all the kids were bored. I was talking way too much.
Yeah.
So that's funny getting on the bus though, because
get on the bus.
You want to though. You want to teach them everything.
Oh, absolutely.
You want everybody to know everything.
Absolutely.
So important.
And I mean, I think I remember like whenever I was first out of seminary, I think one of the things that because I don't necessarily know if I ever was like get on the bus kind of guy. I mean, I think there are certain subject matters if you get me on, I'm definitely that way. Yeah. Still to this day, I still am a little bit.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like in my preaching and stuff, I don't think I was ever like, okay, let's get on the bus, per se.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the one thing that I really, really always wanted is, and that was just some of the conversations you could get into in seminary. Mm-hmm. Just do not translate well over to the parish. They just don't. And I have to imagine that this is the same thing for like every professional.
Yeah, I think it is.
I mean, I think back to like your knowledge in terms of instruments and music and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, it's not to demean anybody else. But whenever you have all these college classes, and on top of it, if you have similar college classes with the same teachers and everything else, like everybody kind of has that same fundamental understanding of things. And so you can actually take that as a starting point and then move to a different direction. And it's hard to do that. Like it was hard to do that right out of seminary. Like, right. I found myself, constantly having to go back to other topics that were like Systematics 1, in terms of my classwork. And I'm like, look, I'm on Systematics 3 over here. Like, but it was like, but at the same time, one of the things that I did find that I did enjoy was the fact that sometimes, especially and again, this kind of goes, like some of those Systems 1's topics, if you will, I just kind of blew through because the professor just went through, and like I was in my rush to get to Systems 3.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I end up getting in these conversations from Systems 1, and I end up going, "Wow, it's like a really good conversation." Like, and there's joy in that I maybe didn't see at first.
Now, is there, without us getting too far into it, is there a certain subject or conversation that you can think of specifically that like you personally would love to get into a room with a bunch of seminary people and just go to town talking about, but like that's not, I would never do like a sermon on that.
Absolutely.
Is there like one example? I'm just curious.
Well, I've spent a large part of my time, just as I've progressed and grown, dealing with the Greek text.
Yeah.
And from my standpoint, like, it can be hard to really dig into a text and then not, in a sense, almost not be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
I've parsed all the words. I've talked about all the participles. I've looked all the manuscript, differentiations or whatever differences there, and I've I've done all this work, and then it's like, the best I can do is be like, yeah, here's a picture. Isn't that neat? I mean, again, it all adds to the sermon. It's all great stuff. And I mean, obviously it's a passion of mine. I love doing it. But at the same time, like, there is a time, there are times whenever I'm like, man, I wish I could have, some friends. Because I'll be honest with you, like, and as pastors move on.
You cut your sentence off there and it just sounded like, I wish I could have some, and you just said friends and then cut off to your next.
I wish I could have friends, everybody. I love friends.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, so here's what I say. I have friends. I have seminarian friends.
Of course, yeah.
Friends that are pastors. I have two really close friends that I still keep in touch with. One of them actually was pastor in Louisville, but he has since taken a call to Lincoln, Missouri. And another one's up in, Great Falls, Montana, I think, something like that. Really close friends of mine, really good friends of mine, but their passions are just completely different than mine.
Yeah.
Like, they'll still dig into a text, but my one buddy is very much the systematician. Mm-hmm. So he'll dig into the text just enough to get him on the mark in terms of going through systematic theology, is what they call it.
Okay.
My other friend is much more in terms of what we would call practical theology, kind of where the rubber meets the road. And I am very much the textual, or what they call the exegete. I like to dig into the language. And so, like, even among these three, like, I don't necessarily talk like this a lot.
That's interesting, because it's like, I didn't realize there's so many, like, there's different angles to go at it.
Oh, yeah.
But see, I think that's with any profession or with any career, anything. There are so many intricacies. This is why I just laugh whenever someone's like, the problem with the government is, I'm like, because you talk to any, but you could talk to a welder and be like, I mean, you just put like a flame to metal, right? It's like, oh,
yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So much to know. There's thousands of things to know. And that's why I just find it's like, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than what people probably think. But that's what's interesting, is I don't know enough about seminary or preaching to really understand how three different people can attack a text differently.
Well, actually, I'll explain a few things here.
Yeah.
And this will give a great opportunity. I'm kind of stealing your question time,
no,
so
that's
I'm sorry
totally
about
fine.
that.
Well, first, can you what exactly do you mean by systematic?
And actually, that's exactly where I was going to go. So, in terms of theology, right? So, theology as a whole, the word literally means words of God. Theos being God, and logos being words. So it's words of God or words about God.
Okay.
So that's what theology is. Now, whenever you get into Scripture, you have two main arms of theology. One is called systematic theology. The other one is called biblical theology. Now, I know instantly you're going, well, right? I want to go with the Bible one.
Right.
Right?
It sounds like the right one.
Yeah, it sounds like the right one. But here's where they differ. And here's the difference. One of them focuses on a book of the Bible as the book presents the theology. Okay. The other one takes all of the Bible and tries to give you a systematic point. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if we were to talk about the Holy Trinity and then talk about, say, the Gospel of John, we would come up with something that was akin to what's known as the economic Trinity. That is, that the Father sends the Son and the Son sends the Spirit. There's almost like a hierarchy.
So, like a economic map or something, like showing how. One thing, am I going off on the wrong thing?
It's economic in terms of, like, this is how it flows, how we see it.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's the flow in terms of how we see it. And so we would end up with if somebody said, well, which one is more powerful? You go, well, the Father is more powerful, the Son is the second, and the third would be the Spirit. And there is that power structure there. Well, the problem is while the Gospel of John certainly presents that kind of structure, we know from systematic theology that as we peer through all of the Scriptures, that's not so.
So
what John is describing is not so much a power thing, but a job thing. He's saying the job of the Father is to send the Son. The job of the Son and the Father is to send the Holy Spirit. It has nothing to do with one is more powerful than the other, but it's how our human brains perceive these things. If we look at how God interacts within himself, what we would call the immanent Trinity, by the way.
Okay.
Just because we need more big words in this podcast. We would end up saying, well, God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they are all equal, and they are all co-eternal, but there is but one God. That's your immanent Trinity.
Okay.
But yet, on the other hand, from the economic standpoint, we can say, well, the Father sends the Son sends the Spirit. And so because we can kind of say that, because we have the Gospel of John, biblical theology would say, okay, here's the kind of the pattern that we have. Systematic theology would say, yes, but this is how the Trinity works within itself.
Okay. So could you say systematic is more of like an overall, like,
Yes.
we're looking at the grander scale of what the Bible's saying?
Yes.
Interesting.
And so biblical is just saying, here's a theology from this specific book of the Bible.
Well, that sounds like biblical is wrong then.
It's not wrong.
It's not, though?
No.
So, but systematic, it sounds like...
Neither
like
one is wrong.
Neither one's wrong.
They're both right.
Interesting.
You need both.
Okay.
You need both.
Is it like, I don't know if this is a good metaphor, but like federal and local government? Like sort of thing? I don't know.
I don't know if I'd go government. I don't know.
That's probably terrible, but I don't know. I mean, that's interesting.
It's a solid question. It'd be kind of like what would be a good example of this? I mean, I mean, look at a book series, like any book series, right? Each individual book has its own kind of perks, right? And it needs to be read from the beginning to the middle to the end. Each of the books do. But yet, at the same time, you can also have like a fan page that's dedicated to the whole book, like to the whole series. Mm-hmm. And it's not saying that for instance, that wiki page or whatever it is, that fan base page, that page isn't wrong. But if you read that page and don't understand what happened, you might miss a huge part of the story.
Ah, okay. That makes sense
right?
to me. Yeah.
And so you kind of have the same thing going on, right? Like the gospel, well, I mean, look, the gospel of Matthew he is presenting that to a group of Jews. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of evidence in that Bible, in that book, that says that he is presenting this to Jews. And if you understand that, you understand what Matthew is doing and why he's doing it and why he's presenting one thing but not the other. So, for instance, in the Gospel of Matthew, there's a genealogy, mm-hmm. right? A genealogy of Jesus. But yet it only goes to, like, King David, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas you go to Luke, it goes all the way to Adam and Eve. Well, Luke is talking to a bunch of Gentiles. Gentiles care less about Adam. Or David, sorry, King David. They don't care about King David. And so he takes it all the way back to Adam and Eve. Even their genealogies, why they have their genealogies the way they do, mm-hmm. is unique. And it's important. And it's important to understand each book of the Bible for what it is. Now, after that, can we start going back and looking from the wider scope and looking at the systematics of it? Well, yeah, of course. And again, we should. That's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like each book of the Bible has its own kind of thing that's being presented.
Interesting. That's fascinating, honestly, because I had no concept of that being able to look at those two things separately.
Oh yeah.
I mean, no, and that's what's so interesting though to me, because I mean, I know there's probably something intricate. So would you say are most people kind of taught, okay, you need to balance these two things, or like you said, how you have friends who kind of go at things different angles? Are there some people who they're like, no, systematic is the way, and other people are like, no, biblical is the way? Or are there people who just they tend to lean more towards one side kind of more strongly when they're studying stuff?
One of the problems that we actually face is kind of like what we're discussing here. Both of these things are good. Both of these things are necessary. But the problem is a lot of times we don't think in these terms, and because of that, we tend to lose sight of one way or the other. As LCMS Lutherans, we have a tendency to fault on the side of systematics. Luther's Small Catechism, completely systematic.
Yeah.
Right? It's the 6 chief parts, and that's, it's supposed to be like the Bible condensed down to these 6 major parts, these 6 major elements, the chief parts. And so we have that idea, and it's like all narrowed down to these 6 chief parts. And so one of the problems is like then people go out and they get a Bible and they start reading it and they go, well, here I am in the Gospel of Mark, or I'm in 1 Corinthians. Why isn't he talking about this over here?
Yeah.
Well, it's like, well, okay, well, that wasn't his concern. He was concerned about something completely different. So yeah, even though it seems like a very obvious place for us nowadays that we'd see like, yeah, of course that should be there. The reality is that Paul didn't have that as his focus. But if you read all of the letters of Paul, and then if you read all the letters of Peter and John, and you read all the other letters around, you'll realize that from a systematic standpoint, this is a chief part. This is something that's really significant. And so that's kind of where we tend to fault on. Is a lot of times people will say, okay, well, I'm Lutheran. I have the Luther Small Catechism. And that's very much a systematic thing.
Interesting. Okay.
But we tend, I don't want to say we fail, but we have a tendency to fault on the side of systematics. What's really fascinating I've seen over the years is that we have a tendency to go on the systematic side, which means the most interesting Bible studies that we get into are non-systematic. So they tend to be more in line with biblical theology. We want to know what the Gospel of Mark says or what the Apostle Paul says. We want to, and they tend to go over just straight books of the Bible. If you go into other churches, however, I have found that a lot of times their pastors will be very much in tune with biblical theology, but what they're lacking is systematic theology. And so then they get swept completely off their feet whenever they run into a systematician. Because they're just not used to anybody going, oh yeah, well we can kind of look at this verse over here and this verse over here, and we put them all together and we say, look, this is and this is our argument, and so they're just completely like enmeshed with that. They're just like, what you can do that? Like, yeah,
that's so interesting because I would say the way I was raised, because my mom is she's very dedicated she's done Bible studies. She's been a part of a Bible study that she did for years and years since I could ever remember, and she is very much the type of person that when and she taught Sunday school too. So when she would do Sunday school, it was very much like, okay, so we're talking about this subject today. Here's all the text, here's all the verses through the Bible that talk about this subject. So is that systematic?
That would be more in line with systematic.
Okay.
However, I mean, again, so one of the dangers of that would be like, did she distinguish? If she was doing, like let's say you were doing a word study and you wanted to look up the word love. Did she make the distinction between the different versions of the word love?
Right.
Did she make distinctions between the Greek words and the Hebrew words and what's transliterated from one to the other?
Yeah.
My guess is no, but that's where the systematician comes in, right? Gotcha. That's why their job is their job. Interesting.
So the systematician,
yeah.
They're looking at sort of would you kind of say they're kind of looking at the behind the scenes sort of thing? I mean, as far as when you're looking at something in English, it's like they're looking at all the Greek translations because you can see, like you said, the word love, but knowing what the actual translated word is could kind of change the way that is perceived in English.
I mean, again, it's a systematician, a good systematician. Yeah, Greek and Hebrew are going to play a big role. But again, you understand, that's a passion of mine.
Right.
Which is why I even here, I immediately jump to the Greek and the Hebrew because like that's for me, like that's where I go.
Right.
And that's the best way for me to explain it. But, again, in the grand scheme of things, like there's other ways to explain it as well. Sometimes it has to do with context of verses. I mean, we think, a verse is talking about warfare because it mentions warfare and yada, yada, yada. And then we read the text and we realize, like, yeah, they mention warfare, but that's not really what's going on here.
Interesting, yeah.
And so a concordance is a fantastic tool if used rightly. A concordance will give you, like, a word and then everywhere that word is used.
Yeah.
Just everywhere. And they're great tools, but you got to use them, Again, look, studying the Bible is long-winded. It's not short-term.
Right. That's what's exciting. I mean, that's why it's exciting, though.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, again, it's just one of those. Like a systematician is going to do all that. That's what their job is. And there's going to be some disagreements, which is why some of us theologians.
Right. That's interesting. Did you say concordance?
Yeah. Concordance.
Yeah, that's right. I remember. That's so funny because I haven't thought about a concordance in a long time, and that's my mom we had a concordance and everything.
Oh yeah,
and so that's so interesting. I don't know. I find that Now I'm gonna try to use my world for a second to maybe translate, because I do find it. Like I have a Power Ranger YouTube channel, and I do these videos where I analyze seasons and stuff. And what I get into, which I don't think a lot of people do, is I get really heavily into who is working on the show at the time, and who's writing the episodes, who's directing the episodes, and all these things, because it's interesting to me when I get people, I'll have people comment stuff, and I'll start looking up, and it's like, well, the person who directed this episode you're saying is so horrible, they only did 2 episodes, and then they obviously weren't hired back. So it's funny to say, like, they probably didn't do a great job, and I don't know, I look at those things. I look at the behind the scenes stuff a lot, because it sort of explains a lot about why a season, or why this, something is happening that maybe it seems off, or seems whatever. And I don't know, that tends to, I don't know. I get really thick in the weeds about Power Rangers, obviously.
Well, sure,
but
but it makes sense, right? It's one of the things that you get into.
Yeah, but then but I know lots of people who are also Power Ranger YouTubers that they don't look at that stuff, and so they're just like, well, I don't know, the season, whatever, it was off, or they might just, their analysis is just like, it was bad, and then I don't know. Sometimes I find reasons to like it because I find what was actually happening at the time.
Sure,
it's like, oh, that makes sense. I don't know. I don't know if that if that connects in any way, but I feel like,
oh yeah, it for sure does. And I mean, again, anytime you're going to study, especially if you start getting into biblical theology, my face just went heavy, and I'll even tell you why, because I'm going to say another word.
Oh man,
I know, it's terrible. It's just, I got so many big words.
Well, you're a smart guy, As my God rest his soul, I can't think of the right word. My late grandfather used to say, "You're a fart smeller." I mean, a smart feller. That's what he said.
That's what he said. The topic is isagogics.
Isagogics.
Yeah,
man, that sounds like a made up word.
It does.
Isagogics.
It's not.
Gogics. That's such a. Yeah. That feels so weird to say. Gogics.
Yeah, I know.
Isagogics. Okay.
Now you gotta watch it. This is the one that starts with an I and not an EI. EI, as in eisegete or eisegetics, means to read something into the text that's not there. That's bad. We don't do that.
Interesting. Okay.
As opposed to exegete or exegetical, which is where you're pulling stuff out of the text. Isagogics or eisegesis is when you read stuff into the text. Isagogics with an I, though, just means biblical introductory material.
Okay.
Who wrote the book? What was going on at the time? What were the people struggling with? What was the economy of the land at the time going through?
Yeah.
Who was ruling? Yada, yada, yada. All that kind of fun and exciting stuff. And, that helps you to understand the background information before you even get into the letter.
Yeah.
Because that way, so for instance, if you're reading about the Corinthians, for instance, and, I one of the reasons that I'm fascinated about the book of Corinthians is because, here you got this town. It's a harbor town, a port, but it's not a singular port. It's dual. This town, what they were doing is they created a way, and you don't get to save that much time, but you get to save some time. If you've ever looked on a map and seen Greece, it's got little peninsulas or things jetting out all over the place.
Right.
Well, back in the ancient world, going into the deep, deep sea was dangerous. A lot of times they thought monsters were out there.
Yeah, I still think that.
Yeah, and
I don't want to go out there.
And so they didn't. So what they did is they tried to avoid it at all costs. And so what they do is they'd stay real close to the shoreline. Now, not always. Sometimes they'd venture out, and as we know, even Paul got shipwrecked on one of those ventures. But for the most part, they would try to stay close to land, which means that if you have a bunch of land jetting out there, you got to go around all of it.
Yeah.
One way to save time was to go into a place like Corinth. Corinth had a narrow piece of land, and it had a port on both sides, and it had a town on both sides.
Wow.
And what they would do is you would pull up your boat, and if you had another boat, like you were a big business kind of thing, they would get all your stuff off, they would put it on carts, they would roll it over to the new boat, they'd reload the boat for you, and off you go.
Wow.
And now you just saved a bunch of time.
Wow.
If you didn't, they actually had a way of actually pulling your boat on and putting it on wheels and actually moving it over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
So
I wonder how many men that took.
Probably a lot.
I just had
But because of
guys,
that, because of the time that you would save, because it was a great port harbor, because you were still in the Roman area, it became incredibly wealthy.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Right? You're saving time. You get to sell stuff on your way, maybe lighten your load a little bit. I mean, it was great. And so, like, Corinth was hugely popular. But think of a lot of port towns. Like, you had a mixing pot of just everything. Mm-hmm. Because you had to be accepting of everything, because who knows who's going to bring their boat up.
Right, yeah.
And so you once you understand that, going into the letter and you start reading the letter, it makes a lot more sense. Now, I mean, that's not going to explain everything that Paul says, of course, but that's going to explain some. And now when you read the 1 Corinthian letter, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I can see why they might struggle with that.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, you're not supposed to eat, meat sacrificed to idols? Okay, that makes sense. If idols are everywhere and people are roasting these things up there and they're saying, yeah, come on. Like, okay, yeah, that makes some sense.
Yeah.
But then Paul says, but, if it's in the marketplace, like, just don't ask questions kind of thing. It's like he's like, Paul's like, look, it's in the marketplace, their gods aren't real anyway. Don't go up to their altar, because going up to their altar is basically saying, I believe in this God. Mm-hmm. But if they're selling the meat in the marketplace, who cares?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the direction Paul goes. And it makes a lot of sense if you see these, they're going to have all these altars all over the place, because there's going to be all these people coming in from everywhere, and they're all going to want their own little altar.
Yeah, that's interesting. See, that I love, because first of all, I really like history. I'm a history buff. And that, even just hearing that, because I don't know much about the book of Corinthians, to be honest.
Yeah.
And hearing that just makes it more intriguing to me. Like, that's interesting to hear, because I don't know that. So, yeah, that's interesting. It's very interesting. I have to pop open a book of Corinthians.
There you go. Book of Corinthians.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I always just find that especially when anybody brings history into it, and kind of understanding the times, that's the one sermon I'll never forget that my youth minister did back in high school, was talking about turn the other cheek, and like when a Roman soldier asks you to carry his bag, a mile, carry it 2 miles, and like then you learn the actual history behind that, and how like a Roman soldier was only allowed to have you carry it for 1 mile, or or an hour, I can't remember, a mile or an hour or something. And so doing 2 was actually kind of putting him in danger, like he was being a little bit abusive. Now, maybe there's more to that, but that's at least, I may be remembering it wrong. But it was just interesting to hear, because it didn't just go into, because you read it and go, why are you giving into abuse even more? And then it's like, oh, we're kind of turning it back on them a little bit. Which maybe you'll know. Maybe we'll talk about that another time if you have more thought.
Yeah,
about it.
Another time we can bring that one up. But
that really was more intriguing, because it's like, well, that changes the whole meaning of everything. When you actually look into it. But
and there's a lot of texts that are like that too.
Yeah.
One of the I always love, like, one of my favorite things is whenever you go through like the top 5 texts that are abused and misused.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, what, one of everybody's favorites is I can do anything, to the Lord who strengthens me. And it's like okay, we are not saying, the Bible is not saying that if you want to bad enough, you can jump over buildings. That's not what's going on. No. Paul is in prison. He is enduring hunger. He is enduring pain and suffering. And he is saying, I can endure all of this because God gives me strength. Mm-hmm. And so he's saying, yes, Christians, we can endure suffering and awfulness because of God who gives us strength through these hard times. That's what Paul's saying. He is not saying that you're going to get that new promotion, you know, or you're going to jump over buildings or you're Superman. He's not saying any of that.
Yeah.
You know, but a lot of times that's the way we take that verse. But I mean, again, same kind of premise. You got to put it into context in order to really grasp what's being said.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this was very interesting. I think this was a good talk. Because you know, it's so interesting to hear about like it's kind of like they used to have that show, or at least I don't know if they still have it. They're like How It's Made.
Yeah.
They're like, here's a pencil. Do you know how it's made? It's like, no, I don't. You know,
I don't. So, I want to know.
Yeah, and then they show you. You're like, that's pretty cool. You know, or whatever it is. You know, so it's the same thing with just like what you do and how you research. And I had no idea there were different ways of looking at it and different, you know, so that's interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is one of the fun things that I get to deal with, right? Biblical theology versus systematic theology.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I have a buddy that's very heavy into systematicians. He's very much into systematic theology.
Yeah. I would love to hear just a group of like you and your buddies getting into a really heated debate about systematic versus like biblical, because I just have to imagine this guy, not heated, I mean as in like you guys are actually angry, but just it would be that would be fascinating to me, is just to hear being like, well, you're only looking at it from the systematic way, and you know, that'd be funny.
Although I will say this, like a lot of times that's not usually a lot of times I've found over the years it's systematic versus like the practical, like where the rubber meets the road kind of thing. And systematics and biblical both, you know, engage into this idea of practical. I mean, again, it's one thing to say, you know, Jesus calls us to baptize. It's another to say, okay, how do you baptize? You know, how do you do it? Yeah, we know the words, but how do you do it?
Yeah.
And that's where you start going, okay, well, here's where the practical angle says, you know, you need this, or you should do it like this, or you should do it like that. And a lot of times our argumentation, actually a lot of arguments within the LCMS end up being more that practical side of things. And unfortunately, a lot of the arguments get way off base very, very fast because it goes into this realm of just opinions about everything.
Right. And then it gets into the name calling. Well, you're stupid and you don't know anything.
Well, yeah, the name calling has to come after that. But no, I mean, you know, it's just one of those things. Like, I think, you know, again, I think a good theologian is going to ask the question, what is the best way to do this? And then they're going to ask the questions, what are the parameters? What makes this the best? Mm-hmm. That is to say, I'm going to define the best by X, Y, and Z. Now let's figure out what the best is. And instead, what we have a tendency to do is say, this is what I like, and here's X, Y, and Z, and that's now how I define the best. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't really work that way. And I mean, look, you're seeing this and you're seeing this kind of struggle all over the place. It's in education too. The last couple education books that I've read have very much been geared towards this kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. I read this book last year, a year and a half ago or something, and it's called Building Thinking Classrooms, and it's actually about math.
Yeah,
of all things, like how to teach math. And I'll be honest, I was fascinated.
Yeah,
like
I remember you talking to me about it.
Yeah, I've read this book because it's all about teaching and best approach to teaching. Now, it is best approaches to teaching math, but what was really interesting is what these guys did is they got a bunch of volunteers, basically volunteer teachers, and you know they had their controls, but then they walked into a classroom and they basically said, "Hey, you've done this forever. Let's take one thing and let's just completely do it different."
Yeah,
and so. You know, in one classroom, they're like, okay, we're just going to move the blackboard to the back of the room. See what happens. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And then in one class, they took all the kids' desks away.
Yeah.
And then one, they took their desk away, but they left chairs. The other one, they didn't have chairs. Mm. One, they each got individual little boards. You know, and they just did all these crazy things.
Yeah.
They just did all of these things. And then after all of this research, they come back and they go, okay, this is where we saw the best test results. You know, and the best learning methodologies for math. And again, math, you know, it's like, here's what we found. And it's like, you know, and it's like really fascinating. So for instance, they found that kids not having desks and not having chairs is the most effective way of teaching. However, they found that after an hour or so, kids would actually get tired from standing up, and that you would actually lose interest. So you kind of almost have to do this compromise where it's like you want kids to stand and be active, but you still have to give them a place to sit down from time to time.
So basically, they're the most they're most active, but if all 4 core subjects did the same thing, kids by the end of the day would be like passed out on the floor because they'd be so tired from standing all day, running around the room.
Standing all day.
That's interesting, yeah.
But yeah, they call it a defronted classroom where you put boards all around the classroom instead of just in the front.
Yeah.
And so they found that actually was incredibly effective.
Yeah, that's what we did like in my music theory class.
Yeah.
Because we had staff chalkboards, staff paper, you'd say, or you call it, or whatever, where you write music on. And so they would just say, we would just sit there and they would say, okay, we're going to write this, or we're going to, play this and write it out. And so we all would just sit there and, follow along on the board. Yeah. But we were standing. So it's like, we kind of did that.
Yeah. You were ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Or maybe you were one of the test subjects.
Here's the thing, and I don't want to brag, but I'm not an intelligent person.
Oh, come on.
That's not my bragging. But music is the only thing that just for some reason clicks with my brain. It clicks with me.
No.
And it's like I can understand. Actually, I got better at writing when I worked with a guy who he was a teacher for a period of time, and this was when I was at a concert venue. And I said, "Oh man, I've always been a horrible writer." And he goes, well, you write music, right? I go, yeah. He's like, you arrange music for like a jazz band? I go, yeah. He goes, when you get to the end of it, are you done? I'm like, well, no, you got to go back and like make sure you got all the dynamics in, make sure everything's right.
Yeah.
He goes, yeah, that's how writing is. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, you write it, and then you go back and you start proofreading, you redo things, and maybe that sentence, we can make that a little better and like make that. And ever since he said that, I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I got it. And I've had people since that time say, you're a really good writer. And I'm like, I am not a good writer. I just, someone related writing to writing music to me. And somehow that clicked with my brain because music's the only thing I really understood. So then, yeah.
Well, but it works as a teaching mechanism. So it worked.
Yeah, it worked out. But I can only really relate through music. But I don't remember where I was going with that. Or what we were talking about before this, what it comes down to is, and the reason I brought this book up is because, the way they did this study and this research is before they even walked in, they set the parameters. Yeah. They said, we succeed if this happens, this happens, this happens. And then they literally went into classrooms and they just flipped everything on their head, piecemeal, one piece at a time. Yeah.
And then they figured out the most effective way to get what they wanted.
Yeah.
And they're basically, they were just trying to teach math. How could you get a kid to actually understand math in a superior way? And so they had this whole idea, they did all these things. And like, so that was like the whole basis. And again, a lot of times our arguments from theological, elements, it kind of comes down to the same thing, except for we never actually establish what it is that's going to cause a success. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when we get into these arguments, what happens is both people have a different parameter for success.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes which one's right. Mm-hmm. And they never argue about that. They'll argue about all the other stuff, but they'll never argue about like, okay, let's actually just look at how do we define success?
Yeah.
Like, and so
that's a big subject because
it is, and I brought it up right at the end.
No, because it really is true. Because I feel like, again, I always relate everything to my world because that's what I understand.
Absolutely, you should.
But the amount of people when I was a road rep for several years and called on directors, the amount of directors that were actually genuinely happy was very, very little, and it was really sad because I would meet these people who are amazing directors. I mean, just amazing people were changing kids' lives, depressed, just really depressed. And then I'd meet other people who were depressed and they were really bad at their job. But there was also people, it was like there's no like, how do you feel like you finally achieved something? And the truth is, I think for a lot of them, none of them do. None of them feel like they've achieved anything, because once you win that award or you get first place at that competition, well, next year, if you don't get first, then everybody's going to look at you like, oh, they lost it. Like they lost their emotion. So they're always in this endless cycle of like, there's no top of the mountain, or there's no end to the race. Like, I won that race. I can be happy that, hey, I've won it so many times, or I've won it once. It's always like, well, now you gotta win it next year, or else you're going to be a failure because that was just a lucky, you just got lucky that time. I don't know. That's what it's sad to me because there's people who, I don't know. There's no, and I feel like I've done that with my band that I for so long tried to. I don't know. I was trying to achieve something, but I didn't know what it was. And then eventually I kind of realized that all these people I was trying to impress, it didn't matter because they didn't care about me anyway. Yeah. And so I just started focusing on how am I going to have the most fun playing in my band and have that. Yeah. And then I just started focusing on having a good time. And I've, the last 5 years I've had more fun than I've had, over the course of 13 years doing it. But I kind of stopped with the whole because there isn't a goal. It's like just have fun every time you play. That's the goal. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent about that. But I like what you're saying though, because if you don't set up a goal or this is the end of the race sort of idea. I mean, again,
and if you don't have the same, if you get into a debate of any kind and you don't have the same ground rules and you don't have the same premise, no one gets to ever win.
True.
No one can ever win. If your goal, again, if your goal is to get the most band members in your band, and my goal is to have music that will get on the radio, those are two different goals.
Right.
Now, maybe they collide and do the same thing.
Maybe, yeah.
But quite frankly, I can come up with a great song and I can say, well, I just don't need that many band members. And you're going to be like, no, we need all of these people. And then we got this big argument going on, and it's a stupid argument because we don't have the same premise.
Right.
The premise is completely different. Your idea of success is different than my idea of success.
Yeah.
And so now we have an argument, and the worst part is nobody gets to ever win the argument.
Yeah, true.
Because even if I got my way and it was an awesome song, and as it turns out, it made it on the radio, which, by the way, would never happen because I wouldn't write music and I wouldn't sing because I don't have a good voice. This is all for illustration purposes only. You would feel like you failed because you didn't have people in your band. Yeah. And so you failed and I succeeded, and I only succeeded by making you fail.
You know what's so funny about this is that if I could even recall every time someone's told me, if you just cut like half of your band members, you'd probably be, just get the good ones and you'd sound so much better. I'm like, yeah, but that would suck. Like, I don't want to do that. I like playing in a big group. I don't want to play with half a jazz band. That sounds horrible to me. It's just funny you use that.
But again,
I've had that conversation.
But again, kind of to your point, like, if your goal is to do X, Y, and Z, maybe cutting band members makes sense. Right. But if your goal is just to have fun and have a good time and go out and play and enjoy yourself, maybe having a bunch of band people is, in your band is what you want. Yeah. And you know what? More power to you. If that's what you want and you're the leader, guess what? You win the debate. Yeah. That's where you're going. Yeah. And right on, rightfully so.
That's funny. It's really funny. You use that exact analogy because, man, the amount of times if some random person's like, you know what you should do? Cut your band and to just have like one or two horns. You don't need a jazz band. I'm like, yeah, but I hate that. So,
I kind of like this though.
Yeah, it's my going back to what you said earlier in the episode. But I want friends.
I want friends.
I like having people. It's fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
Well, I think we're probably at the point we can go to.
We're there. We're there. It's time. for Church Chatter. Church Chatter. All right.
Well, Advent season has been going on.
Yep, we're about to close out Advent season. Got a big weekend ahead of us.
Yeah.
Big weekend. We, of course, have service tomorrow, and depending on when you listen to this, that will be Wednesday. That'll be the third Wednesday in Advent. Mm-hmm. So that would be, Wednesday the 20th. So depending on when I get this out.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll probably be listening to this after the service. But anyway, depending on when you hear this and when I actually get this out, we have service on Wednesday. But we also have service on Sunday. Now, Sunday morning, we're going to just sing some hymns and songs. I'll probably have some scripture readings and stuff in there, but really, we're just going to be doing some Christmas carols, and it's going to be pretty awesome.
Fun. So you're saying we actually have service on Christmas Eve?
Yes.
But it's Christmas Eve.
Well, we have to have service on Christmas Eve. Actually, you know what? I'll tell you what. This is a pet peeve of mine, right?
Go on.
So we're going to have service on Christmas Eve. We're going to have it at 4:30, 7, and 11. And that's not including the 9 a.m. hymn sing that we're in the morning. That's 9 a.m. But we also have service on Christmas Day. Yeah. On the actual day, the feast day.
But people have to go see families and stuff.
Yeah, bring your family to church. It's awesome. Get your kids up. Look, bring your kids in their jammas. Yeah. I don't care if the whole family matches in jammas. It would actually be awesome. You'll sit in a pew. It'd be great, right? Christmas. Look. Yeah, have I told you what the word Christmas even means?
What does Christmas mean?
That's a great question, Casey. Christmas means Christ Mass. Mass as in a service with the Eucharist or Holy Communion.
But it's only got one S.
Look, it's a shortened form of the word Christ Mass. Christmas Day is for church. You're just over there pushing the buttons.
I'm pushing the button because was it last year that Christmas was on Sunday, or was it the year before? One of the years. I mean, I've only been here for 3 years, so this is one of the years was, and it was just funny because every time Christmas is on a Sunday, people are like, "But it's Christmas." There's always somebody who says that.
Yeah,
church on Christmas. Yeah, it's kind of about Christ. So that just always makes me laugh. That's why because I know the answer.
Yeah. So everybody, you should all be going to church on Christmas Day at 10 a.m.
in matching pajamas. Absolutely. You know what? I'd be thrilled if everybody showed up in matching pajamas. That would really be fun. Hilarious.
Absolutely. I would just love it. See all the families coming in there, all the kids matching.
And what time is the service on Sunday?
It's at 10 a.m.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. on Monday, Christmas Day. Christmas Day. Of course, we have services on New Year's Eve as well, but that's also on a Sunday. So we'll just have our regular 8 a.m. and 10:45 service. So that's kind of our service plan going forward. We will not be having service the Wednesday after Christmas. We will not be having a Wednesday service.
Okay,
I know, but no service then. But then after that, we're going to kick back going, start up our Wednesday services again, Wednesday at 5:30. For those of you that either can't make it on Sunday or just prefer to come on Wednesday, either way.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm back at that point, right?
You're back at that point.
See, this time of year, it's I love Christmas, but I get booted.
You do.
I get booted for Advent because they're like, we want traditional. I'm like, okay, fine. So that's fine.
That's fighting fine. Words right there. We're going to get into some arguments right now.
Some of our people a hard time. Like last year, there was like the first week of Advent, and I pulled it because we still have the contemporary band still has rehearsal after the service.
Yeah.
Because usually I play the service and I have rehearsal, but since I'm not allowed, I'm allowed to be there. But so I pulled up, and some of the people were like, "Who's this person pulled up? What are they doing here?" And then when I came in, they're like, "You're really freaking us out." We thought, who is that guy just pulling up in the middle of the service? And I'm like, "Excuse me, I come here every week, okay? I think, No, I gave him a hard time about that last time. The other day, it was funny. But yeah, so I'm back on. I'm excited.
You're back on in the new year, 2024.
That's right.
That's right.
24. Wow.
Well, I think that's actually all the time that we have, and that's all the church chatter that I have for us this evening. So
that's all the church chatter I got too.
So with that, we will say goodbye. But I mean, hey, next week we'll have our Christmas one. It'll be awesome. Right. Special Christmas edition. And we are going to end with saying, of course, Taylor Swift was Person of the Year.
Yes.
Person of the Year.
Person of the Year.
I don't even know what to do about that.
Well, she did cause an actual earthquake.
That's fair.
I mean, that alone, plus all the cities who are just like, oh my gosh, we're gonna go for years and years now because of Taylor Swift.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
it's craziness. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. Have a great one. Bye.
Bye.